All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday evening lecture series. This presentation is being recorded and once processed will be uploaded to our YouTube channel for anybody to access at a later date. If you have any questions for the speaker, please type in your questions in the chat function, and I will do my best to relay the questions to our speaker at an appropriate time. Or you can wait till the presentation is over and the question answer session begins. Tonight's lecture is Maryland and DC Breeding Bird Atlas 3, and it's being presented by Gabriel Foley. Gabriel is an enthusiastic birder from the prairies of Saskatchewan. I hope I got that right, Canada. For his graduate work there, he researched nighthawk habitat use in Canada's boreal forest. Over the past decade, he has worked on research projects in Canada, the US, and South Africa, and for conservation organizations like the Nature Conservancy of Canada. Now he's excited to be the coordinator for the Maryland and DC Breeding Bird Atlas 3. And with that, Gabriel Foley, you have the stage.
Thanks very much, Neville. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm very excited to get to tell you about my favorite thing, which is the Atlas. I will share my screen with y'all. There. You should be seeing my slide. Looks good.
We do.
All right, excellent. So I'll just give you a brief background on the Atlas, what it is, and then walk through kind of some of the things that we should be aiming to be doing this season. We're coming into the 4th year of data collection, and then I'll wrap up with a kind of an overview of where we're at with the Atlas. So a breeding bird atlas is a mapping project. You have a road atlas, you have a world atlas, you have a breeding bird atlas. So it's just a collection of maps, essentially. The goal of our atlas is to document the breeding distribution of all birds in Maryland and DC. This is the 3rd time that the project has been done. It was done in the 80s and the 2000s. And now we're doing the 3rd one from 2020 to 2024. So we're coming towards the end of it, which is honestly, I feel like it just started. Hard to believe. We're looking at the distribution, abundance, and timing of all species that nest in the region. And so to do this, we use this block grid. You can see it up in the top right here. There's about 1,300 of these blocks, we call them, the squares of the grid. They're each about 3 miles by 3 miles, and observers go into every single one of these blocks, and they document as many breeding birds as they can in each of those blocks. And then these data are used to document population changes, especially because we have past atlases to compare it to. We can see how things are changing over time. You can identify important areas for birds, whether that's a single species or a whole community, and you can identify species at risk. The State Wildlife Action Plan is coming up for a renewal soon, and the Atlas data will feature heavily in informing that. So this is one of my kind of favorite maps that has come out of the Atlas so far, and it's not really bird related. This is a map of all of the latitude and longitude points from each checklist that observers have submitted to the Atlas portal. And what is really awesome about this map, there's about 30,000 unique locations that make this up. And just by putting in the locations of where people have gone atlasing, you get a perfect outline of the entire region of Maryland and DC. I think this is really, really neat. So for the Atlas, every county has a set of coordinators that are your go-to folks that atlasers in a county tend to interact with more than me. They know more about the county than I do. And in this case, it's Paul Kreis, who is on tonight, and Mike Hudson, who Neville said was leading an intro to atlasing talk in a week or two, I think. If you want to, if you have any questions or want to chat with them about anything, their email address is baltimore@mdbirds.org. And that same address applies to any county in Maryland. Just substitute the appropriate county. So for our project, we want to document the breeding distribution of all these birds. So how do we do it? In the past, they used paper forms, and now we use, unsurprisingly, we use an app on a phone, eBird. I'm sure that everybody here is very familiar with eBird, this being, Baltimore Bird Club, but eBird is a platform very popular with birders because it allows you to submit lists of all the birds that you've seen and tie in a location and a date with each of those checklists. You can do everything from a computer. You don't need the app, but using the app does a lot of that work for you, like recording the location and the distance and the time that you were atlasing for. So I think it's about 60 or 70% of people that submit of checklists that are submitted through the app, something like that. Now, if you just go birding, you can use eBird. If you want to go atlasing, you have to use what's called a portal to submit your checklists to the Atlas project. So a checklist is just the list of birds that you've seen during an outing. And the portal is a label that goes onto that checklist that says, hey, I was participating in the Maryland DC Breeding Bird Atlas, and I want this to count towards the data set. You can change the portal in the settings on the app. There's instructions online if you go to the Atlas website, which there's a link at the end of this talk, and I can share it in the chat. One of the great things about eBird is, you can record the species, which is great, but you also can record how many of each species you saw. You can classify the behavior of each species, which is very important for an atlas. And it links up with the location, the date, and how long you were atlasing for. All of these things are perfect for a mapping project like ours. So eBird and the Atlas are a great fit. One of the other really nice things about it is that you can go online and you can view a map that's almost live of all of the sightings that have been reported for each block in the region. So when we are going out, we're mapping breeding birds, right? So how do you know when a bird is breeding versus it just being, a bird? You can, of course, find the nest, but nests, they're usually hard to find. Birds are pretty good at hiding them. So instead of just focusing on nests, we use bird behavior to identify how likely it is that a bird is nesting at a particular location. Sometimes this behavior is, pretty weak, like a bird that's just singing there or a bird that's in the right habitat. And sometimes it's very strong, like a bird that is actually building a nest. To do that, we've got about 20 different breeding codes, and these are just ways to categorize the different behaviors that might occur. And so each of those breeding codes then are put into one of three categories that line up with how strong of evidence the particular behavior was. There's possible, probable, and confirmed. And we use a different ratio of those possible, probable, and confirmed breeding codes to help us know when a block is done. We don't need to sample any more birds in it. And then, of course, you're recording the location and the date for each of these observations. Now, one of the things that is kind of important when you're dealing with breeding birds, especially, here kind of in the mid-Atlantic, you have a lot of birds that are going to be migrating through while resident birds of that same species have already started nesting. How do you decide, let's take bald eagle, for example. How do you decide if a bald eagle is a migrant or one that is maybe nesting in that location. One of the ways that you can do that is by the time of year. So in Maryland, eagles are migrating through until about mid-April-ish. And so that's up until mid-April. If you just see an eagle without any other sort of behavior, then you would just kind of assume that it's a migrant. After April 15th, you can be pretty sure that, okay, migration's pretty much done. So if I see an eagle here, it's probably nesting somewhere. So I can use a code like a bird that's in the right habitat for breeding. So this chart that I've got here, this is kind of a way to visualize the overlap between the breeding season and the migration season. So this light green solid line, that represents a bird's migration. The dots at the end are its safe dates. The dotted line, that's darker green, that's the breeding season, and that's represented by each species' egg dates. So it's not an entirely perfect representation of things, but it gives you an idea. So this is one of the things that's on the website to help with kind of getting a picture of how the season affects the birds that are breeding in your region. Now, I mentioned earlier that each block has a target to know when it is complete. We use these so that all of the like 1,300 or so blocks they have about the same amount of sampling effort, and they can all be compared fairly equally. So by the end of the atlas, which is next year already, each block should have 70 species in it, 20 hours of effort, and an hour of nocturnal effort. And then we don't want to have more than 25% possible codes, but we want at least 25% confirmed codes. And all of these different things kind of work together to make sure that there's enough time spent in a block, and that the time spent there is actually resulting in getting good atlasing observations. And then we do also want to make sure that in each block, all the different habitats are being sampled, because those have different communities of birds. And we want to have observations across the whole breeding season. You know, some birds are nesting a lot earlier than others, and some quite a bit later. We want to make sure that everything gets sampled well. One of the really nice things about using eBird is that you can go and you can see how this is going pretty much live. So if you go to this address, this web address, you can see this map. And there's different things that you can pick. This is the diurnal effort map. This shows how many hours of daytime effort have gone into atlasing in Maryland and DC. You can also see things like nocturnal effort or coded species or checklists, things like that. But this gives you an idea of where has there been enough effort already, and where might more effort be needed. So if you look at this, the darker blue, that's got more effort. That's got at least 40 hours of effort in it. Whereas the yellow, that has 0 to 5. So not a whole lot. So you can look at this, Baltimore County, Baltimore is looking great. Whereas Cecil County, on the other hand, could use some help, especially up in the northeastern part of it. So if you're thinking, well, we've kind of got a good handle on the blocks locally, where can I go that's not too far away that'll make a big impact on, the final Atlas data set? Northeastern Cecil County might be a good choice. And you could confirm that by looking at some of the other things that I'll show you in a second here. One of the main things that we're looking for in each block is nocturnal effort. So nocturnal effort, that's just going out at night, but it starts 20 minutes after sunset, and checklists also need to end 40 minutes before sunrise. So the time is a little bit odd. It's a little bit awkward and hard to remember. But if you're constantly running short checklists, you don't really have to worry about remembering that too much. A lot of the species that are best detected, with nocturnal effort are actually almost more easily detected at dusk and dawn, which technically doesn't count for nocturnal effort. So if you're going out and atlasing around dusk and dawn, you stand a good chance of getting a lot of these species, like let's say great horned owl, right? And that may not count for nocturnal effort. So county coordinators have some leeway in evaluating a block and deciding, well, we may not have an hour of nocturnal effort, but we found all the owls, so we'll call this block complete. The other thing that I'd say about nocturnal effort is a lot of the times when you go out at night, there's not as many birds out as there are during the day. So you wind up with some checklists where you just don't find anything. And that's okay, that's expected, but you should be submitting those checklists even though they don't have any species on them, because it records the effort that you put in, which is really important. We don't know if you were atlasing if your checklist doesn't get submitted. So this figure here, if you look at all of the blocks that have no owls in them, and then you take the average amount of nocturnal effort, it is very close to zero. If you take all the blocks that have one owl, not necessarily barred owl, but one owl species in them, and you get the average amount of effort, nocturnal effort in those blocks, you've got 20 minutes or so. Do the same for 2 owls, you're up to about an hour, and 3 owls, and on average you have, about an hour and 15 minutes. So putting in that nocturnal effort, you can see really makes a big difference in the owls that you're able to detect. So that's the main reason why we recommend having this in every block, is to try and get a good sampling of the owls that nest throughout Maryland. Now, there's a lot going on here, and you don't really need to worry too much about all of the text down here. These are just block names, it doesn't matter. Each one of these bars represents a block. The main point of showing this is to show what kind of shape Baltimore is in. So this is one of the things that I make each year to see kind of at a glance, how are the blocks in a county doing towards their completion goals? So one of the goals is 70 species, right? So if a bar has hit this line, then they've reached that goal. Each of these purple colors represent different proportions of breeding categories: confirmed, probable, and possible. If they have a gold bar around them, then that means that the proportion is right. We haven't got more than 25% possible, and we've got at least 25% confirmed. So this is just kind of a way to quickly assess how's the county doing. This is awesome. Baltimore is in really, really great shape. There's actually quite a few of these blocks that have been marked complete, even if they haven't quite hit the line yet, because some of these are urban blocks and they won't get that. So here is another thing that we have for assessing a block. Now this is more for an atlaser to use rather than coordinators. The idea with this is that for each block, you can go on to eBird and you can see, okay, how many hours have been put in there, what species have been seen, all that stuff. But it's very difficult to actually go and see where have people been atlasing, how many species at each place have been found, when have they gone, that kind of thing. So that's the hope with these PDFs. So we have one for every block, and it shows a map of that block with all the locations that people have been atlasing at. The color represents the number of species that have been seen there, and the size of the dot represents the number of checklists that they've submitted from there. You can also tell whether a block has been adopted. It'll say, yes or no up here. If a block has been adopted, then you probably don't need to spend as much time, thinking about going there because somebody else has committed to making sure that that block is going to be complete by the end of the atlas. Then these bars represent how close the block is to being complete. So you can see here, there's been 35 species found in Denton Southwest, so it's about halfway to its target. Then for that, on that same PDF on the next page, we have a list of all the species that haven't been found yet in that block, but that were found in the last atlas. So if they were recorded in BBA2, but they haven't been found yet, we'll put them on this list. And the idea is that this is like a target list for you. Some species won't be there. Bobwhite, common nighthawk, you won't find them in this block. But, there's probably a mallard there if there's any water. So this gives you kind of a short list of things to focus on and try to go find. Another thing that we have is Rich Downs, the Caroline County coordinator. He made an Airtable app that basically presents the safe dates a whole lot better than any of the other things that we've done, which are mostly spreadsheets or PDFs or printouts. So if you wanted to get this, so far it's just available through a link from Rich. But if you are interested in accessing that, just send me an email and I'll put you in touch with Rich. The other thing that Rich has done is a Google Earth overlay. So not Google Maps, Google Earth. It's an overlay that you can download. You can put it on your computer or onto your phone. And it shows, it'll have a block grid on it. And each block has, you can see there's these small pins that are color coded. They're yellow, red, or green with the block name beside them. And the idea here is that gives you a quick look at how close a block is to being done, how close it is to reaching its completion requirements. So a red pin means that block has a lot more work to go. A green pin means, no, it's pretty close. And of course, yellow is in the middle. If you click on a pin, you get all of this information in this window. A lot of this is the same information that I just showed you in those PDFs, but because it's all, just one tap away on each pin and you don't have to keep downloading different PDFs, this is a lot easier to use when you're out in the field. I like to print off the PDF, have that just, for keeping notes on and stuff. And then I tend to use this a whole lot more when I'm just kind of out and about. Again, if you want access to this, just give me an email and I'll put you in touch with Rich. All of the block maps, all the species distribution maps from the past 2 atlases, you can of course get the books and have them, but we've also gone ahead and put them into PDFs that are available on the website so that you can go back, say you're curious, what was Chuck Will's Widow distribution in BBA2? Do I have a chance of getting any in Baltimore? And where might that be? You can go and you can take a look at that. You don't need to have the book to do it. We also have them for the first atlas. So when this project started, it was really easy to go out and just go birding, and you would easily, find breeding behavior of birds as you went along, and you'd make a dent on a block. Especially in 2020, everywhere that you went, was pretty fresh territory. So you didn't have to worry too much about, thinking about it strategically. But that's changed now. This is a map of northern cardinals that have been coded in our atlas. As you can see, almost everywhere. This is probably 98% of blocks has a coded cardinal in it. A lot of the common species maps look like this. So if you're just going out and atlasing while you're birding, you're atlasing randomly, that's great, that's fine. But if you want to actually make if you want to be effective and efficient with your atlasing, then being more strategic about it is important. So here's a map of hummingbirds, a bird that is a lot less detectable than a cardinal. So, you might see, oh, okay, there's a couple blocks here in eastern Baltimore that don't have hummingbird. Maybe I could, just make a note of when I see a hummingbird feeder as I'm driving through, and come back and check on that a couple times through the season, something like that. But what we're really looking for in general is to meet the project goals as a whole, right? Statewide project goals. We want to prioritize blocks that don't have a lot of effort in them. Like I was showing you the difference between, a lot of Baltimore's blocks versus, some of Cecil County's blocks. Even better if you can focus on blocks that haven't been adopted yet. In many of the rural counties, that's pretty much all of them. There's not a lot of adoption, like along the Eastern Shore, for example. And then, of course, you want to focus on that target list of species, keeping in mind that, there have been changes. And so there are species that are on that list that you won't find, and there's species that aren't on that list that you will find. Possible species, you make a note of what species only have possible breeding codes. So those are birds that are in the right habitat or that have been recorded just singing, and upgrade those. We only want 25% of breeding codes in a block to be possible. That nocturnal effort, and I recognize that with nocturnal effort, that's not something that everyone can do, whether that is for safety reasons, or just, you're in bed early, and that's perfectly fine. If you don't feel like you can get the nocturnal effort in a block done, don't let that stop you from adopting a block and getting everything else done. Just let the county coordinator know that you're not going to be able to do the nocturnal atlasing, and then we know, and we can fill that hole in. The other thing, which Paul has actually, he's provided more information on than just about anybody else, block busting or block parties. There's a great article on the website that Paul wrote, I think it was in 2009, after the last atlas ended, and it has a ton of really useful information about this. So the idea here is that you go out in a small group and you intensively atlas one or two blocks, and so you try to get a whole bunch done by using a group of people. It's more of a social outing, and generally speaking, you want to do one, maybe 2 blocks per trip. Kind of depends on how many folks you have in your group, and ideally, you want to do 2 trips to a block, at least a week apart. There's one of the breeding codes is a bird that's been singing for 7 or more days, and that's a probable code. A bird that's singing in the same place for a week is probably on territory. So if you are able to get some of those S7 codes, then you're able to lower the number of possible codes, which helps towards completing the block. So Paul is the expert on block busting. Feel free to talk to him about that, but don't feel like you need to let Paul organize all of these trips for you either. If you want to, get a few folks together and go and tackle a block on a Saturday morning, that's great. I just recommend letting the county coordinator know, the county where that block is going to be in. Let them know that you're coming in so that effort isn't doubled. But otherwise, the more, self-starting trips, the better. So block adoption, I've talked about this a little bit. This is this is really helpful for county coordinators because the idea with adopting a block is just saying, hey, I'm going to help this block reach its completion criteria by the end of the atlas. And this basically lets the county coordinator know that, okay, I don't have to worry about this block. It's going to be done. It really helps with, trying to prioritize which blocks need to have special effort going in because they might not get done otherwise. So if you've been holding off on actually adopting a block because you don't really fully want to commit, that's perfectly fine. But I'd urge you to consider helping Mike and Paul out just in their planning and let them know at least what blocks you are, you're planning to spend more time at than others. You're able to check on block adoption status at this link right here, bit.ly/Atlas block tool. And bit.ly links are weird in that capitalization actually does matter. So just make sure that all those words are capitalized. Right now, about 60% of blocks are unadopted. Most of those are in rural counties. Okay, so now I'm kind of going on to the Atlas data that we've got. The context of these data are that all of these checklists were submitted to the Atlas portal. They were then filtered from there. So every checklist that is shown in these data had to have at least one breeding code on the checklist, or it had to be nocturnal. All of these data have also undergone a breeding code review, and they include observations from January 1st, 2020 up until September of last year. So this right here, this is a figure of each county's atlasing effort. These are all of the hours that have been recorded atlasing for a region. The red line here, these are checklists that had a breeding code on them. And the blue are checklists that didn't have a breeding code on them, but were still submitted to the portal. So these are the things that I was just talking about where we would actually filter those out. So they wouldn't actually be considered atlasing data. So what I want to see as a coordinator is I want to see a spiky red bar and I want to see a very low blue bar. And as you can see, Baltimore, that is exactly what we have. Baltimore is working really hard and doing a fantastic job at atlasing. Here's a map of how that looks if you color in each of the blocks with the amount of effort that's gone into them. So this one in the top right, that is from the last atlas. There's about 60,000 hours that went into the last atlas over 5 years. Now, caveat there were more than that. Those are just the recorded hours. We have a much more precise way of collecting effort. But as you can see, we've got almost 100,000 hours of effort in 3 years, which is mind-blowing. But you can see that a lot of that effort is concentrated where people live. Not surprising, of course, but if we're thinking about northeastern Cecil County, it would be nice if we could head up there, every now and then. So this is similar map, but this is just condensing all of that into just each county. So how many hours of effort does each county have right now? You can see, similar trends, but what I wanted to show is, has that changed at all over time? Here's the figure that was on the previous page up here. This is 2022. And this is a GIF of the effort maps from each year. And what you can see is that, no, we're not really, spreading effort out as time goes on. Things are pretty much staying the same. So for me as a coordinator, that's not what I want to see so much. What I would rather be seeing is seeing that effort kind of I want to see, as the years go on, I want to see the blue increase in these counties that are more rural. Looking at how much effort we've had go in from year to year just as a whole is kind of interesting. 2020, this purple line that's very tall, despite there being a pandemic, or maybe because there was a pandemic, we had a huge spike. And I think part of that was the novelty of the project, right? Brand new project, everybody's very excited to jump into it. And spring of 2020, that is when birding started to become kind of a thing that people had more time to be able to do. So I think the two kind of work together to create this big peak. Now, last year and the year before, pretty similar. We had a little bit less effort last year than the previous year, but not too much of a difference. Compare that to the last atlas and the third year, so that's where we just finished, had a huge dip in how much effort went into it. So I was happy to see that wasn't the case for us this time. I'll be interested to see if there's a big spike for us in this year like there was in the last atlas. Species richness. This is just the number of species that have been found in a block. In this case, the brighter the color, the more species that were found in that particular block. In the top right, this is species richness from the last atlas. And in the bottom left, the current species richness in this atlas. And you can see, in general, it kind of follows the effort map that you saw earlier. Not quite so, not perfect. Like Carroll County, for instance, Carroll County looks pretty similar to, to Baltimore and Howard. But there wasn't nearly as much effort that went into Carroll. So that's an indication that a lot of the effort that went into Carroll was very directed atlasing effort as opposed to, more general effort. But we would like to see, this kind of uniform color spread more across the region. Some areas, just won't be as species rich as others. That is what you would expect. But we also don't want effort to be a reason why we're seeing that. This dark purple where 0 birds have been observed, that's Aberdeen Proving Ground. We've not been able to get in there to do any atlasing yet. So there's 10 or 12 blocks that just don't have any data. So then if we kind of look at the species turnover that we've had since the last atlas, this is that effort map that I showed you a few slides ago on the right. And then this is zoomed into Baltimore. And this is the number of species for each block that were observed in this atlas that weren't observed in BBA2. And you'll notice that some of these numbers are negative, right? So the scale goes both ways. It's a little bit misleading down here at the bottom. It's not that these two blocks don't have any data in them. It's that these two blocks didn't exist in the last atlas, so there's nothing to compare them to. And similar story for this one. It did exist, but this is one of the Hart-Miller Island blocks, and all of the data from Hart-Miller Island in the last atlas went into a different block. So these 3 blocks you can't really look at, but the rest of it, it's looking very close to 0, which is great. That's what you want to see in general. Now, Paul, this is the figure that I was talking to you just before we started. This is up here in the top right. That's that map of Baltimore that I just showed you. Now, if we kind of take that same idea and we look at what species are the ones that are most often not being found, what we're seeing, ring-necked pheasant, that's not surprising. Ring-necked pheasants basically don't nest in Maryland anymore. Hooded warbler, okay, that's interesting, but not too unexpected. Blue-winged warbler, white-eyed vireo, these are scrubby birds. A lot of the scrubby birds are not doing super well, so Veery, can see that one. Rock pigeon. That one very much surprised me. I was very shocked to see that one on here. Especially, it's number 5. Mallard, another one that I would not have anticipated. Kentucky warbler, not surprised about that. They've been hit pretty hard in their distribution. Yellow warbler, also not as surprised about that one. But killdeer, I am surprised that killdeer is right up there. So I don't have a lot of thoughts to add about why some of these species are on here, but I am interested to hear what your thoughts are on some of them. We've also had a few new breeding species added to our state list. Since the start of the project, we've had 4 species that have been confirmed that hadn't nested in the state before. White ibis was in 2020 down in Somerset County. Trumpeter swans now in multiple counties at multiple different sites. Really, really cool to see that happening. Eurasian collared dove here in Washington County. It's back again. We'll see if it nests again. And then Anhinga. This was probably the most exciting of all of those. There was a nest in Anne Arundel County. I've got a picture of it here. And they did successfully hatch young. So that's pretty cool. And then we got new to the atlas, where these are species that they started nesting in Maryland before the project started, but they hadn't been recorded on the last atlas. So that's Mississippi kite. We've got, again, them showing up in multiple locations. Merlin out in Western Maryland, and Sandhill crane in Garrett County. Now I'm just quickly going to show you a few things that I think are really exciting, and they're just kind of different ways of looking at some of this timing data. So this is something that we've never collected in an atlas before, just because you didn't have the capacity to handle the sort of volume of observations that you need for this kind of thing. We have that now through eBird. So this is basically a figure that shows the distribution of all the data points that have been collected for each of these different categories of behavior. This line in the middle of the bar, that's the median. This bar right here, the big rectangle, that's the 50% of where the data lie. And then this bubble around it, that is a plotted density distribution. So if you were to go and collect another observation, this shows you how likely it is to fall anywhere along this line. What is really cool about this is, this singing agitated courtship, that's fine. It's all pretty much the same. But this nest building, occupied nest, fledged young, you've got exactly what you would think you would get, where you have a little stair step as it comes down. So just exciting to see the potential of this sort of thing to be used. Another way of looking at that, I use this sometimes for breeding code review. The red dots here, these are fledged young codes, recently fledged young. The idea with the recently fledged young code is that a bird should be out of the nest, but still dependent on its parents. The problem with that code is that it's not like, you don't have a hard cutoff of when that code doesn't apply anymore. It just kind of sort of gradually tapers off. And so as the bird gets older, it becomes harder to decide, should I apply a fledged young code to it or not? The feeding young code, that is a breeding code that's used when an adult is feeding a chick that's out of the nest. If an adult is feeding it, then it's still dependent on the parent. So you can use the feeding young code as sort of a check to see whether the fledged young codes are being applied appropriately, as you would, as you'd be expecting to see for a species. And so for goldfinch here, you can see that yeah, even though, we're getting fledged young codes well into October, we're also getting feeding young codes showing almost identical distributions. So, yeah, all of these are probably very legitimate. Another thing that you can do is you can look at it and compare it to latitude or longitude, I guess, in this case. This is just a visualization of it, but if we look at the tree swallow egg dates and Julian date, that's just the day of the year. So January 1st is day 1, December 31st is day 365. The egg date is when was the egg laid, right? And so if you compare, you might think Western Maryland would have later eggs than the Eastern Shore. And so you would see blue down here, you'd see red down here, and it would ramp up to blue up here. And maybe if we had more data points in Western Maryland, we might see that in the mountains, but there certainly doesn't appear to be any pattern without looking at it statistically, there certainly doesn't appear to be a pattern happening down here. So just an interesting visualization that you can do with the timing data. One of the last things that I'm going to tell you about is kind of these categories, the season categories that we've come up with. So this is one of the ways that we try and evaluate some of the breeding codes that are submitted for each species. So each species has these set of 5 seasons. The breeding season, that's just within safe dates. And so within safe dates, as long as the bird is expected to be in that region, we're pretty much thinking that, any breeding code submitted, as long as it lines up with the bird's biology, that's probably a good code. These shoulder seasons, post-breeding and pre-breeding, these are informed by the egg dates. So the last egg date, that's the end of the post-breeding season. The first egg date, that's the start of the pre-breeding season. We don't retain any possible codes that are submitted during these seasons, but we do keep probable codes and confirmed codes, and just a lot of the probable codes we might look at a little more closely. And then these early and late seasons, this is the time of year when you're really not expecting to have any nesting for a species. So any breeding codes are kind of a surprise, although there's plenty of confirmed codes that do show up. And looking into them more closely, most of these do turn out to be legitimate, which is pretty interesting. So if you want to get involved with this project, the very first thing that you have to do is just watch for breeding behavior. Submit your checklist to eBird and use the Atlas portal. Consider adopting a block. It goes a long way, and you can learn more, especially about kind of the more technical side of things, like how to use eBird at this web address. How to Atlas is the name of the page. And then if you have any issues or any questions, Paul and Mike are super. They're very knowledgeable and always willing to help. So you can reach them at this email address. And that's all I've got.
Fascinating stuff. If anybody has a question, please feel free to unmute and just ask away.
Okay, I have one real quick. So I have a location. It's probably a basic question, but there's a location near me which I think is not being birded a lot, and I want to know which block it's in and who do I contact to make sure my data. How would I start?
I'd go to that eBird Explore page, and I can put the link for that in the chat, and you can see a map of all of the blocks. And you
Okay.
can see how much they've been atlased. You're able to search by location. So you can zoom in to where it is that you're interested in, and then you can see you can also go and see a block summary from that page, which should tell you more about the exact species and effort and everything that's been recorded. So
Does it give me who was adopted the block and all that information?
unfortunately, it doesn't on eBird. You can do that by either getting one of those PDFs that I had mentioned, or there's a website that you can see all of those. eBird hasn't incorporated block adoption at all. So unfortunately, we have to use the two different things, but I will put both of those addresses in here in a second.
Okay. And that's going into the chat then.
Yep. So here's the effort map. And then I have a bit.ly for this, but this is that's the long address. That's for the Atlas or adoption tool.
Gabriel, is there something called a Maryland Yellow Book for like
Yeah.
the breeding dates? Okay. So
Yeah,
is that
there
is that the PDF that you were talking about?
Right
Oh,
here.
there's actually a book. All
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Where do you get that?
So this isn't being printed anymore. You can find PDFs of it online. This was last updated in 1996, though. So the breeding timeline that I talked about, that has a lot of the same information that's in there, plus some updated egg dates and things like that. there's still a lot of stuff in the yellow book that isn't, like it has all the county information and everything. It has bar charts showing frequency of sightings, kind of like eBird has. So I would definitely recommend downloading that PDF, but I'm gonna put a link to another file into the chat, and that file is going to have links to pretty much every resource that we've produced. That way there's no, searching around.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I've tried to find this online and I've failed. So that's why I
It
thought I'd
is.
ask.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to find things on the eBird website, you can't search it. So you're just clicking through it.
Yeah, I have another question, and it has to do with climate change and how that's kind of messing around the natural cycle. And is the breeding bird atlas capturing that? Like, do we have a better sense of what's changing?
That's certainly one of the, looking at the timing of things and the distribution, because of course climate change is also influencing habitat and land use. So looking at the distribution of where birds are being located, those data can then be used to answer questions about how climate change are affecting it. I don't think that you can take a map of a change and say, this is because of climate change. But I mean, climate change, there's been papers that have come out, showing that birds are moving their, in the last 150 years or so, they've moved their, the window of breeding up by, 3 weeks in some cases. So huge changes have occurred in the phenology of our breeding species.
And they're seeing that the data that we're getting from Maryland and DC, is that confirmed, or can that be used to confirm that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Atlas
gotcha.
data have been used to answer these sort of questions, and our data are, exactly the same structure. So
Gotcha.
perfectly set up for it.
Is Maryland and DC the only states that do this, or every state has its own breeding bird atlas?
Almost every state has its own breeding bird atlas. Us in New York are the first ones to be doing a third repeat of the project. Most others have one or maybe two. Atlases were started in Maryland.
Okay.
Chan Robbins saw that they were being done in Europe and brought the idea over here. So in the 70s, there were like test atlases that were done in Howard and Montgomery counties. And then they published those results. And I think it was, oh, I can't remember. One of the northeastern states was actually the first one to do it. But yeah, Maryland kind of has that like little fun footnote. This
I
is
have
that
another
PDF I
question.
mentioned.
Yeah, about egg dates and safe dates. I noticed there was an overlap. So what, when can you atlas? Do you have to wait till the safe date? I'm sure this is a rudimentary question, but
No, not at all.
Yeah.
This is a really good question. And it's something that is it trips enough people up that atlases now are kind of trying to move away from safe dates. But yeah, the idea with a safe date is that if you see a bird and it's within safe dates, you can assume that that bird is nesting here. It's not migrating.
Okay.
If you're outside of safe dates, though, I mean, think about bluebirds. You know, you can have bluebirds nesting in like late February sometimes,
Mhm.
but bluebirds are migrating through here long after that. So if you just see a bluebird, how do you know whether it's one of these migrants or it's a bird that is actually, you know, trying to nest early? So safe dates help you with that decision. If it's after, I forget what the safe date is for bluebirds, sometime in April, I think. If it's after that date, you can assume, okay, that bird is nesting here. If it's before that date, you want to see breeding behavior that, you know, that bluebird going into a bluebird box.
Okay.
Well, you know, it's obviously not migrating.
Carrying nested material or something
Exactly.
like that. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Awesome. I think Davey has a question.
I do. I'm just going to keep my video off. This isn't about the atlas, but why is it in the same species that some migrate and some stay? What accounts for that?
That's a good question. I mean, the really short cop-out answer is just life history.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, different species have evolved to have different, you know, different life histories. One kind of interesting thing about that, you have your resident birds, right? Like your chickadees, your cardinals, your Carolina wrens. A lot of those birds, they'll start nesting a whole lot earlier than other birds will. You know, and that makes sense. They're here already. They've spent the winter. They don't, you know, they're ready to go. You have your short distance migrants. So, you know, those are things that maybe they wintered down in the southern US. They're able to respond to temperature changes, to weather events. So if it's a really warm spring, they're able to migrate a little bit earlier and they can start nesting earlier. So they can respond to some of those, you know, some of the impacts that we're seeing with climate change a little bit better. Long distance migrants, though, if you're in South America, say you're a purple martin, you have no idea what the weather is up in North America. So you're just relying on the date, on the length of daylight. And so as climate change influences the weather, you know, it's not influencing the length of daylight that you have. So the birds are responding to the same cues, these long distance migrants, they're responding to the same cues as they always have, but they're finding that there's a mismatch now when they arrive because, you know, they've missed these food peaks that they might have had in a, you know, more, you know, we'll say normal sort of climate.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Thanks.
Oh.
And that's great, but also like within the same species. I mean, I'm like, I did, you know, I've seen so many more robins now where I just seen a handful. So does that mean that I'm taking it that some stayed through the winter and some migrated elsewhere? So it's just,
Yeah, it's actually, one of
That's
the kind of interesting things about birds is that, a bird can be adapted, the same species, it can be adapted for one individual can be adapted for a different set of conditions than another individual. So, a robin, they nest way up into Alaska. A bird that's nesting in Alaska is going to be able to tolerate a different set of conditions than a bird that's nesting down in, Georgia. And so what you get a lot of times with these birds that are really widespread, blue jays are, a bird that is a good example of this too, where you'll have northern populations that come down, they don't go quite far as south, and they're basically replacing the birds that used to be there who then went way south. And so you've got individuals that are able to tolerate different sets of conditions, even though they're on the same species. And what's more interesting is that some species have flexibility with that. And so if they're exposed to a different set of conditions, they can adapt as an individual, they can change, they've got some plasticity. And other species don't have that at all. They're set. As an individual, if this is what they knew when they were hatched, then that's what they're stuck with. So really big implications with climate change, with whether you have that plasticity or not.
That's great.
Thank you.
If there aren't any other questions, I have two announcements. So if you caught this earlier, there is a field trip on April 15th at Miami Beach that's led by Mike Hudson, which is titled Introduction to Atlasing. So if you want to experience atlasing in the field, that will be a great field trip to latch on. It's on April 15th. You can get more information on our website. I hope to see some of you there. And the last announcement is our next lecture is going to be on May 24th. It is in person at the Walmart Center in Sylvan Arboretum. It's going to be our speaker is Tiffany Kirsten, who is I think she holds the big birding year record for the lower 48 states. That is an in-person event, and we need people to RSVP if you're planning to attend. Information again is on the website, or if you can look at your e-news that you may have received, there's a clickable link that will take you to the Eventbrite site where you can register for the event. So please do. Hope to see you there.
Can I do a little marketing thing here?
Sure.
Like when they advertise in stores, buy now or you won't get a ticket, or you won't be able, we'll run out of stock. So it's filling up quickly. So RSVP now before you don't have a chance to.
Yeah. RSVP now, you get a free drink.
Oh, that's another good. Yes, and I will buy it next year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gabriel. Really appreciate you walking us through Breeding Bird Atlas. Fascinating information. Hopefully it threw a light on the efforts with the Breeding Atlas. I especially did not know what really goes into it and how it's structured. So that was really illuminating. Once again, thank you very much, and hope to see everybody around on field trips.
Yeah, ditto. That was a great lecture. I really learned a lot, and I'm going to be an atlaser now.
Yeah.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
See you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.